messed about my phone.
Hmm?
You want to just take this to your office?
Yeah, I'll take them out. It is on or no?
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. Okay. Bismillah. Bismillah walhamdulillah. Wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa barak wa sallam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. So we're going to continue on with our discussion of Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj. And we've been reading over the last few weeks a piece that collates the various hadith that talk about the journey. And to preface the conversation, as we've done before, the sequence of events, the chronology of it, there's going to be different opinions on. And as we're looking at this through the prism of the prophetic biography, the Seerah literature has a categorical difference in terms of rigor in authentication than like the hadith literature would, for example. Do you know? And so where we're kind of going through this and reading this collated understanding that the Sheikh has put together, and extrapolating meaning, it's like a very vividly described journey, and there's a lot that we can take from it. So probably be a couple of more times that we're reading through it before we kind of get to the end of it. Yeah? And we're towards the end now of the Meccan period of the Seerah, that with Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj, there's going to be, a shift now in the direction of the Prophet's migration to Medina. But I'm going to read through this. It's always weird when you're looking at like a Muslim site and then the ads that pop up are like the farthest thing from Islam. And it's just kind of interesting. Okay, so I'm going to read through like from the beginning, just so we kind of get to the part where we were at last time, and then we'll pick up from there, inshallah. Yeah? In the name of Allah, most merciful, most beneficent, and blessings and peace upon the Messenger of Allah and his family and companions. As the Prophet, upon him blessings and peace, was in Al-Hijr at the house, lying down at rest between two men, Jibreel and Mikael came to him. With them was a third angel. They carried him until they brought him to the spring of Zamzam, where they asked him to lie on his back, and Jibreel took him over from the other two. Another version says, the roof of my house was opened, and Jibreel descended. He split the Prophet's chest from his throat to the bottom of his belly. Then Jibreel said to Mikael, bring me a vessel of water from Zamzam, so that I will purify his heart and expand his chest. He took out his heart and washed it 3 times, removing from it what was wrong. Mikael went back and forth to him with the vessel of water from Zamzam 3 times. Then he brought him a golden vessel filled with wisdom and belief, which he emptied into his chest. He filled his chest with hilm, intelligence, patience, and good character, knowledge, certainty, and submission. Then he closed it up. He sealed it between his shoulders with the seal of prophethood. Then he brought the Burak, handsome-faced and bridled, a tall white beast, bigger than the donkey but smaller than the mule. He could place his hooves at the farthest boundary of his gaze. He had long ears. Whenever he faced a mountain, his hind legs would extend, and whenever he went downhill, his front legs would extend. He had 2 wings on his thighs, which lent strength to his legs. He bucked when the Prophet came to mount him. Jibreel put his hand on his mane and said, are you not ashamed, O Burak? By Allah, no one has ridden you in all creation more dear to Allah than he is. Hearing this, he was so ashamed that he sweated until he became soaked, and he stood still so the Prophet mounted him. The other prophets used to mount the Burak before. Sa'id ibn al-Musayyib said, it is the beast of Ibrahim, which he used to mount whenever he traveled to the sacred house. Jibreel departed with him. He placed himself on his right while Mikael was on his left. In Ibn Sa'ad's version, the one holding his stirrup was Jibreel, and the one holding the reins of the Burak was Mikael. They traveled until they reached a land with date palms. Jibreel said to the Prophet, alight and pray here. He did so and remounted. Then Jibreel said, do you know where you prayed? He said, no. Jibreel said, you prayed in At-Tayba, the land of pastures, and the migration will take place there. The Buraq continued his lightning flight, placing his hooves wherever his gaze could reach. Jibreel then said again, alight and pray here. He did so and remounted. Then Jibreel said, do you know where you prayed? He said, no. Jibreel said, you prayed in Madian, a city on the shore of the Red Sea bordering Tabuk near the valley of Shu'aib, at the tree of Musa, where Musa alayhi salam rested from fatigue and hunger during his flight from Fir'aun. The Buraq continued his lightning flight. Then Jibreel said again, alight and pray here. He did so and remounted. Then Jibreel said, do you know where you prayed? He said, no. Jibreel said, you prayed at the mountain of Sina, Mount Sinai, where Allah addressed Musa. Then he reached a land where the palaces of Seerah became visible to him. Jibreel said to him, alight and pray. He did so and remounted, and the Buraq continued his lightning flight. And Jibreel said, do you know where you prayed? He said, no. Jibreel said, you prayed in Bethlehem, where Isa ibn Maryam was born. As the Prophet was traveling mounted on the Buraq, he saw a devil from the jinn who was trying to get near him holding a firebrand. Everywhere the Prophet turned, he would see him. Jibreel said to him, shall I teach you words which if you say them, his firebrand will go out and he will fall dead? The Prophet said, yes. Jibreel said, say, A'udhu bi wajhillahi al-kareem, bi kalimatillahi at-tamma, allati la yujawwizuhunna barrun wala fajir, min sharri ma yanzilu min as-sama, min sharri ma ya'ruju fiha, wa min sharri ma dhara'a fil ard, wa min sharri ma yakhruju minha, ومن فتن الليل والنهار ومن توارق الليل والنهار إلى طريق يترك بخير يا رحمن. That I seek refuge in the face of Allah, the most generous, and in Allah's perfect words, which neither the righteous nor the disobedient overstep, from the evil of what descends from the heaven, and the evil of what ascends to it, and the evil of what is created in the earth, and the trials of the night and the day, and the visitors of the night and the day, except the visitor that comes with goodness, Ya Rahman. At this the devil fell dead on his face, and his firebrand went out. They traveled until they reached a people who sowed in a day and reaped in a day. Every time they reaped, their harvest would be replenished as before. The Prophet said, O Jibreel, what is this? He replied, these are al-mujahidun, those who strive in the path of Allah Azza wa Jal. Every good deed of theirs is multiplied for them 700 times, and whatever they spend returns multiplied. The Prophet then noticed a fragrant wind and said, O Jibreel, what is this sweet scent? He replied, this is the scent of the lady who combed the hair of Fir'aun's daughter and that of her children. As she combed the hair of Fir'aun's daughter, the comb fell and she said, Bismillah, in the name of Allah, may Fir'aun perish. Whereupon Fir'aun's daughter said, do you have a Lord other than my father? She said, yes. Fir'aun's daughter said, shall I tell my father? She said, yes. She told him, and he summoned her and said, do you have a Lord other than me? She replied, yes, my Lord and your Lord is Allah. This woman had 2 sons and a husband. Fir'aun summoned them, and he began to entice the woman and her husband to renege on their religion, but they refused. He said, then I shall kill you. She said, be so good as to bury us all together in a single grave if you kill us. He replied, granted, and it is your right to ask us. He then ordered that a huge cow made of copper be filled with boiling liquid, and that she and her children be thrown into it. The children were taken and thrown in one after the other. The second and youngest was still an infant at the breast of his mother. When they took him, he said, mother, fall and do not tarry, for indeed you are on the right. Then she was thrown in with her children. Ibn Abbas said that 4 spoke from the cradle as they were still infants. This child, Yusuf's witness, Jurayj's companion, and Isa ibn Maryam. I think this is where we stopped last time, right? Okay, so a framing of where we are, right? Last time we talked about that the Prophet ﷺ is 52 years old when this is happening, and he's learning from Jibreel, right? That Jibreel ﷺ is teaching the Prophet ﷺ. We talked about now these things that he's being shown and those who struggle and they strive. And we talked about mujahada being a part of this religion, that the outward ease that comes is also attached to like a inward struggle that becomes necessary for growth. You can't have spiritual ascension if there's nothing to improve upon, right? Like there has to be some movement that still goes in some upward direction. You see? And then we talked about this instance of the woman with Fir'aun, and we don't know anything about this lady other than she was the lady that combed the hair of Pharaoh's daughter. Do you know? And her ajr is so great because of her iman and what she went through that the Prophet is smelling the fragrant scent of whatever it is that this woman is experiencing in this other reality. Do you see what I mean? And now as we get through this, he's going to be shown other things as well that are going to incorporate what the consequences are for not engaging in practices. And the Prophet continues to ask Jibreel alayhi salam, and he's in a place where he is open to understanding and learning and listening. Do you know? And this is going to be a key part of the mode of engagement of the Prophet alayhi salam. Man kana yu'minu billahi wal yawm al-akhir falyaqul khayran aw liyasmut, that whosoever habitually believes in Allah on the last day, let them utter good or be silent. The default in our tradition is silence, right? You listen, right? Because you can't learn if you're the one that's speaking all the time, because if you're speaking, you can't listen. How can you speak and listen simultaneously? Do you know? And so he's hearing, he's taking in, and he's asking questions, right? So when he speaks and he sees these people, the mujahid, what is this? Who are these people? Because there's a desire to actually have information. And all of this is coming at the consequence of over a decade of hardship and difficulty and persecution. So we don't want to see it in a vacuum, but we want to see that the knowledge that the Prophet is acquiring is also something that becomes a source of healing and contentment, right? An Islamic civilization is predicated on a foundational that's built upon knowledge. Do you know? And not just the acquisition of information that you memorize and can rotely regurgitate, but that informs now decisions and choices, right? We don't say, Ihdina sirat al-mustaqim, that guide me to a straight path, just so I know it exists over there, but we say it so that we actually walk the path. Do you know? May Allah make us those who walk the Sirat al-Mustaqim. But like you don't know it just for the sake of knowing it. You know it so you try to act upon it, right? And the first group are the people who struggle. The mujahidun, right? They're engaged in mujahida. Do you see? So a God-centric religion requires us to understand there's certain things that Allah asks us to do, we'll love to do, certain things that we will struggle with, it'll be hard, and certain things that we just fundamentally not understand, but we have an iman in Allah that says He knows better, right? That I might not be the one that knows better. It's not a rational or irrational framing. It makes sense to me or does not make sense to me subjectively, but it interjects a third prism that is supra-rational. I don't have to understand it for it to be true. My comprehension isn't a necessary variable for its validity. Do you know what I mean? It's important to understand as we continue on with this, because you don't want to read into this in a mode of self-deprecation, but to be able to understand that our religion creates a distinction between those who struggle with something and those who willfully just are kind of not engaged in it in some capacity. Does that make sense? Right? And so as the Prophet continues, after they see, they have this scent of this fragrant, they move on now in the journey. Then the Prophet saw people whose heads were being shattered. Then every time they would return to their original state and be shattered again without delay. He said, "O Jibreel, who are these people?" And he replied, "These are the people whose heads were too heavy on their pillows to get up and fulfill the prescribed prayers." Right? May Allah make it easy for us. One of the first things that you teach somebody when they learn Islam is what's called hurm al-waqt, the sanctity of the prayer, the timings. Do you know? Just because you know how to pray doesn't mean you know how to teach somebody how to pray. Do you know what I mean? If somebody walked in here and they took their shahada, like prayer is fard upon them. But the end form of prayer that has the fara'id, the wajibat, the sunan all in it, the way we pray, right? Like that is not what you would teach somebody at the onset. They're just getting into it. They're gonna be taught just the obligatory actions in the beginning. In the Hanafi school, in the obligations of a prayer, the only Arabic that you have to recite is what is the smallest verse of Quran. It's in Surah Yusuf. It says, ثُمَّ النَّذِرُ, and then he looked. And you say that in the standing, and then the rest of it you just go through the postures. These are amongst the fara'id. It's a legally valid reason for somebody who's new to Islam or new to prayer, as they're learning the prayer, that they don't forego praying the prayer in the appointed time, and it doesn't become overwhelming because you're telling them, you're Muslim now, you gotta know Fatiha and a portion of the Quran, and when you bow you say this, and when you prostrate you say this, and this is what you say in between this and that, and they're like, no one's ever said the word prostration to me before. What is an ablution, right? And it's just overwhelming and overwhelming and overwhelming. Do you know what I mean? But one of the things you can't change for the person, even in that moment, is that the windows of time of the prayer are the windows of time of the prayer. Do you see? And those are allocated by Allah. There's a difference between me having struggle in getting up, right? It's hard to wake up at 3 in the morning in the middle of the summer. Do you know? It's hard to like do certain things, but that's where the God centricity is rooted in understanding what we said last week, like the ajr comes from the struggle. Do you know? You want to get to a place where there's ease in it, but there's a difference between somebody saying, man, I ain't wake up for Fajr, and the person who said, I'm gonna go to bed at 10 o'clock tonight and not 3 o'clock in the morning, and I'm gonna put on 3 alarm clocks, and I'm gonna drink a gallon of water so I have to get up and go to the bathroom every 20 minutes, versus the person who said, I'm just gonna get up and do it when I wanna do it. You can see where there's a disconnect between Allah said to do X and like the person doing it differently. Because on this journey, the Prophet ﷺ is going to get the 5 daily prayers. And how does he get them? Well, he goes and engages at every level of the 7 skies, right? The different prophet at each level. And Musa ﷺ is going to meet him as he comes now from engaging with Allah in discussion. And Musa is going to say, what did you get from God? And one of the things the Prophet says at the beginning is, he gave us 50 prayers. And Moses says, go back, your people will not do 50. Mine didn't do what they were supposed to do. Yours are not going to do this. And they go back and forth until it's 5, and the Prophet says, I'm embarrassed to go back. But Allah tells the Prophet, you're going to do 5, but as if you did 50, right? But the notion is, we were actually made to do 50, you know? And here, like preemptively, the Prophet is a man who we know is what? Of mercy, love, compassion, commitment to his people. So he's being told, here's like a consequence to this. Do you see what I mean? And he's going to balance it out for us because ease is what he wants for us. When we pray in the nights of Ramadan, when the Prophet gathers in the nights to pray, and people start to come out more in number, as he gathered again, and he gathered, and then he didn't come out. And then when he came out again sometime later, and they said, where were you, essentially, he said, I didn't want you to think this was obligatory and it to be hard upon you, right? There's shuyukh who have written texts that say that like getting up for Fajr isn't even the hard one, that most people's difficulty is getting up to pray Dhuhr and Asr, because they're not getting up from a bed, but it's hard to get up from like an office table. Do you know? But our tradition tells us that the first thing you're going to be asked about is your prayer. May Allah make it easy for us. And if it was good, then everything that comes after is good. If it's not good, then everything that comes after it's not good. And it's not that we're not given these answers prior to. My relationship to certain things might not stem from a recognition now of the multidimensional understanding of religion. So if somebody gave me the words fard and haram before they taught me how to celebrate the divine or understand who it is that I'm praying to, or said, here, you pray these sunnah prayers because the Prophet prayed them, but never taught me like whose sunnah I was actually following, then it's just mechanics and ritual and form, and there's no conviction or ideals or iman rooted in it, right? But at some juncture, you gotta ask yourself the questions that need to be asked and then figure out, well, what's my relationship to this? Do you know? In 5 minutes extra of the nafs being in charge, fundamentally, I'm gonna have to explain, like, why did I do it in this way? Do you see what I mean? And it's hard, right? It can be hard, but sometimes it's also not. I was in Denmark and I was sitting with these guys and they were talking about how hard it is to wake up for Fajr. And I was like, yeah, man, like struggle is real, right? It's not easy getting up for Fajr. And it was my first day in Denmark. I had landed that afternoon and I said to them, you know, what time do you all pray Fajr here? And they said 8:30 in the morning, right? I was like, come on, man. 8:30 in the morning, that is not hard to get up for. You know what I mean? Right? But the perspective on it has to be one that also aligns with a recognition of like, well, what's the point of salah to begin with? Do you know? And not from what so-and-so said or such and such said. What does the Quran say is like the point of this thing? Because it tells you like what it does, what it has the potential of yielding, how it serves as a protection from things that are not good for you. Do you know what I mean? And as a source of replenishment and contentment and everything else. But I'm gonna get out of it what I put into it. Do you know? We don't live in a structure that is rooted in a recognition of our tradition and its importance. Are you bringing food for us?
Yeah.
What? Kanafa?
And I brought some forks and like plates and stuff. Excuse me.
No way.
Oh, you're not good. I'll just get it. We have more, so if you guys run out, we'll come back with more.
Where is this coming from?
We had an ASA event. We're on Kimmel 45.
Oh yeah? Feel free to get some kanafa at any point in time. Thank you, Sophia, for having no one pay attention to me now the rest of the night. But do you get what I'm saying? And this is different, like someone struggling versus somebody saying, well, I don't think it's a big deal. It is a big deal, do you know? You gotta get into a place where you start to acknowledge what gets in the way. From the time I was 12 until I was about 16, I did not pray my prayers. I'm not saying that to you with a sense of pride, but I'm saying it to you also that I don't dislike the person that I was. That person was necessary in order for me to be where I'm at right now. And as I got to a place where I invested in an understanding of what religion and spirituality meant to me and exploring what text actually says and trying to build a relationship with it, and I built a relationship in turn with ritual that was influenced by like actual theology and faith. I'm not praying in a vacuum, I'm praying to a God, and who is the God that I'm praying to? When I started to do it once and then twice and got to 5 times a day, like nobody can take that away from me, right? Alhamdulillah. And then it puts me in a place where I can have an understanding that like, well, who is the one that's opening the door for me in the first place? Why would Allah invite me to pray these prayers if He didn't want to accept what it was that I was invoking Him by? Do you know? But self-deprecation is not going to work. I have people that join our community every single year, whether they're students or community members new to New York, and they come and their interaction with ritual and practice doesn't operate in a vacuum, but it's influenced by a lot of different things. And a pedagogy that's rooted in a sense of understanding and care towards oneself as much as towards others is not just about, hey, I prayed because I was surrounded by community and it was easier for me to practice outwardly in a way when everybody around me was doing it. You want to build a relationship with it to such an extent that you're doing it even when no one else around you is Muslim. And that's going to be an inward out practice, not an outward alone practice. Do you get what I mean? And to recognize and have consciousness about how do I ready myself for some of these things. Does that make sense? What I'd like for you to do, we can just take a couple of minutes, right? When is it more difficult to just like stick to the times? And what are the times where it's more easy? Right? In self-reflection and contemplation, where you have comfortable, like, kind of your comfortability in making yourself vulnerable to the people you're talking to. Because our tradition teaches us, Iman is like a pendulum. It's going to go up and down, right? But we have this thing that we owe to Allah, like certain things, and we're going to be asked about it. Do you know? And the beauty of our God, right? We have hadith that tell us that when the angels are assessing our prayer and they see gaps in the fara'id and they go back to Allah and they say, they didn't do all the stuff they were supposed to do. Our Lord is Arhamar Rahimin, the most merciful of those who show mercy. So he tells his angels, go back and see if they did anything extra. Is there anything from like the recommended? Is there anything from the nafila, right? He's looking for a reason to accept. Do you know? You didn't get it done, and he's saying, well, let's go see if there's anything that can say as to why we would still accept it. Do you get what I mean? You don't want to be indifferent towards that, but you want to find courage and strength through one that actually loves you for who you are. And then say, I want to work to the best of my potential and capacity in pursuit of a relationship with that divine entity. One that's looking for a reason to accept from me, not looking for a reason to push me away. So what gets in the way? What makes it hard for us to have this relationship with our prayer? And what are the things that at times create ease with it? Does the question make sense? We can turn the persons next to us and kind of talk it out a bit. And if you want to grab some kanafa, also feel free to grab some. But let's talk it out for a few minutes, then we'll come back and discuss. Go ahead. If you don't know the names of the people you're sitting with, share some names before.
Being the only one.
Assalamu alaikum, how are you? So nice to see you all. I'm okay, thank you. Yeah, I was like, okay.
Yeah. If not, it's just like valley, like it's not that great. I feel like not as much as kind of hard. I feel like I noticed that all the time. I'm like, oh my god, it's like every 2 hours. I agree. Good God.
Does it taste good? How's it taste? It's good? Yeah?
I was like, oh, someone's interrupting my one-on-one knuckle time.
Sorry, sorry.
Oh, it's okay.
No, I'm okay, thank you. Yeah. I like it. Okay, so what are some of the things we're talking about? What are we discussing? None of you guys want kanafa? Are you just waiting? Just waiting?
I was going to say that after daylight savings time, I think Asr has become the hardest for me because I've been praying Zohar at the same time that I usually do, which is around like 1:15, and Asr starts at like 2:25, and then it's like prime time to like start working again at work right after Zohar, so it's getting harder to like get up to pray for Asr, and I noticed that I've been cutting it like really close, so I think that's been the hardest for me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very like real thing, right? Other thoughts? What else come up for people? What makes it like harder? What makes it easier? Yeah.
I would say in terms of the time in the summer, because the gap is bigger, so you have more flexibility to schedule a time to pray. Whereas like right now in daylight savings, like every like hour and a half or so, like it's like another prayer. So especially during the workday, it can be kind of difficult to carve out that time to pray, even if it's like 5 or like 15 minutes. But it's about, I think, practicing that discipline, which is what Allah wants us to do in the first place by having 5 separate times to pray, as opposed to just doing it one time, whether it's like in the morning or at night.
Yeah, right. And we have different fiqh opinions. Everybody agrees there's 5. Do you know? But there's going to be different opinions on like when these 5 start and stop. But everyone agrees that there's 5, right? What else? Like what else comes up for people in the discussions? Yeah.
So echoing off of what they were referring to, there's people jokingly refer to it as one with the winter, where it's sort of like an easy thing.
One wudu winter?
Where it's an easy thing to get through your salons, right?
Yeah.
That's not the case. And for me personally, that's not the case. And
You can't keep wudu for all 5 prayers? That's very brave of you to admit in this gathering. Thank you. Yeah.
but the limitations that we were talking about were limitations as they pertain to our
I'm just putting visitors in the visitor system, but I'm listening too. I just want people to come in and pray. I'm sorry.
It's only like 90% completed. So,
Yeah.
and those responsibilities that limit us from praying on time are completely irrelevant in the grand scheme of things. And I was referencing a point that you made earlier about how we were designed to pray 50 times a day, which puts into perspective really what our true purpose here in the dunya is to be first and foremost slaves of Allah, and how everything else sort of becomes irrelevant. So if you put it in that perspective where we were supposed to pray 50 times a day, there's no way we're getting our work done. There's no way we're getting our schoolwork or our work for the day. So of course it's a blessing in that sense. But yeah, that's something that.
Yeah, and you want to think about this in a mode of incentivizing. Do you know, if you didn't eat food for the next 3 days, not 3 months, but you just didn't eat properly for the next 3 days, what would be the consequence? Like, what would happen?
If you don't eat,
Yeah.
you'll die.
No, for 3 days. Yeah.
You'll still die though.
You'll die after 3 days and not eat? A day. After you don't eat for a day. What happens? Huh?
You'll starve.
And then what happens? You don't feel good, you're tired, and then what happens? Yeah, right? Irritability, anger, prone to kind of like instantaneous reactions. You need to nourish your physical self. Do you get what I mean? We have a frame of self-understanding that we're not just a body. You have a heart, you have a ruh, a soul, you have a nafs, like there's other parts to you. In the same way, if you don't eat well, like the nourishment that your body needs is not going to allow for it to function absent of that nourishment. There's things that nourish like our inner self. And it's not anything other than just fact, do you know? And you don't have to know what it's doing in order for it to bear benefit, right? Like you all are eating kanafa, you know, and none of you are eating kanafa. I don't know why. I'm glad you got up. Yeah. Why are none of you eating it? You don't want to eat it? Huh? Are all the guys on a diet in the room? Huh? Ladies first? Is that what you? But you're still sitting down. There's only one person with a beard standing over there right now. Do you know what I mean? There you go. Yeah. Most of us couldn't explain like what the food is doing inside of our body when we eat it, right? Like you don't know what it's doing. You know what I mean? Some of you might, but most of us don't. I couldn't tell you what's actually happening with water inside of me as much as I couldn't tell you what's happening if I eat broccoli versus if I eat a Reese's peanut butter cup. Do you know? I could tell you if I ate just candy for 3 weeks, that's a bad idea. Do you see what I mean? But I don't have to understand what's happening in order for it to happen. I don't even have to experience like what's happening. I could experience something that feels great and it could be damaging. Eating chocolate is amazing. If I ate kanafa every meal for the next 3 weeks, just because it tastes good doesn't mean what's happening inwardly is good. Do you get what I'm saying? So you don't have to know what's happening on a metaphysical level in order for the nourishment to still happen to these other parts of yourself. And if something hasn't been nourished in the way that by design it's intended to be nourished, why wouldn't you get overwhelmed the way you get overwhelmed? Why wouldn't you get stressed in the ways that you get stressed? If something isn't functioning in the way that it was intended to function by design, then that's going to be a problem, right? The Prophet says that every affair that does not begin in the name of Allah, then it's cut off. And what's cut off from his barakah, you're surrounded by a society that secularity has most of what you're exposed to not be actions that were initiated in the name of God. So by default, there's already a diminishing of barakah to it, right? Do you walk into your office or these meetings and people start with a dua? Do you know? Probably not. Do you know what I mean? They're not like, all right, John, you know, we're gonna start in the name of Allah today, right? Do you know? No, like they're not doing it, right? But that means also that matter did not start in the name of Allah. Do you see? And then consequently, like the restaurants you're eating in, do you know, the food could taste good. The chef likely didn't start in the name of Allah if you're not eating at a place where that is a part of the process. And understanding then consequentially how all of you is connected to the rest of you, and what's so much around us is running on default settings and not consciousness and awareness, I might not even realize like why it is that I don't get up to pray. And it has complexity, not because it's difficult to understand, but it's multiple facets to it. Do you see what I mean? If I can't incentivize it, right? Like, how do you nourish your heart? How do you feed your heart? You know how to feed your stomach? You're feeding your stomach right now, right? Right? Did it taste good? Alhamdulillah. How do you know it tasted good? Huh? And does your stomach feel good right now? Right? And how do you know that your stomach feels good right now?
Because you're not in pain.
Huh?
Because you know what pain is, you're not in pain.
But you've had an awareness of enough experiences that you can pay attention to a contentment that stems from this, right? How do you know when your heart is full? Or how do you know what you're consuming is good for your heart? How do you know? And if you never talked about prayer as something that has to do with the heart, right? And your inner self, and all you know was the words fard and haram before anybody taught you to celebrate Allah, like why wouldn't you just stay at the desk? Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense? The multiple dimensions to this religion have to be understood in tandem, and understanding at this juncture, we're not 7 or 8 or 9 years old. We might be new to Islam in different ways and have to be kind to ourselves, but you gotta get a grasp on fiqh so that you know how to implement fiqh in a given situation. Do you know what I mean? Right? Like, if you don't know the fara'id of wudu, and you're in a place where you work in an office and you do have a 3-minute window to pray Asr. Do you know what I mean? If you know your fiqh, you will know, like, what can I actually wear on my feet that I can wipe over? How much of my hair do I have to wash or wipe so I don't have to undo an entire headscarf and then wrap it up in like moments? Do you know what I mean? What are like the obligatory parts? What are the necessary parts? What are the recommended parts? Because I just got to get it done in certain places. And sometimes every prayer is not going to feel like you're standing in front of the Kaaba. It's not supposed to though, because you don't worship the feeling, you worship Allah. And it'll be easier to get the prescribed prayers done in their time if you know how to adapt in situations, especially places that were not built for Muslims who pray their prayers, and you got to still pray in those places. Do you see what I mean? The number of students that I have that come here, or people who are working in New York the first time, and they don't know how to adapt schedules, and language becomes important. Can you pray dhuhr in the entire window from the time the sun starts to descend from its zenith until the time Asr starts? Yes or no? Have you ever heard somebody tell you it's better to pray it earlier? Right? And when you use language that you're not understanding how the person receives it, so the number of people who takes a statement like that and they don't have a foundational basis in terminology, and then they think, if I don't pray dhuhr at the minute it comes in, I'm doing something wrong. And then it adds anxiety, it adds stress, it adds difficulty to it. Do you see what I mean? And they got to figure out between classes and meetings, like if I don't get it right on the dot as soon as it comes in, there's something problematic. Man, there are cab drivers who drive cabs till 3 in the morning, and they got to work 12, 13 hours to put meals on the table for their families, and they're praying their prayers on the hoods of their taxis. right? Can you say that for them praying Isha at 2 a.m. is like worse than you praying Isha at like 6 o'clock when it comes in? It's not a comparable situation. Do you see what I mean? But if you don't know your fiqh, you're not going to know how to adapt in a given circumstance, right? You might wake up and you got 2 minutes left to pray Fajr. You can pray Fajr with 2 minutes and make wudu and get through Fajr if you know what the integral components to Fajr actually are. And if you don't, and you're going to get up and be like, I got to wash my nose out this many times and rinse this many times, you're going to go right back to bed. And shaitan's got you. Do you see what I mean? And you start to learn the foundations at the place and juncture that you're at right now. And if you don't know how Sharia applies to you when you're working as the only Muslim in a space, then you take the time to like figure out and navigate strategically how you can do that. Do you see what I mean? Because then what's else happening simultaneously? Like unhealthy guilt starts to build up. Do you know? And then remorse starts to build up. And then I become desensitized to it. Do you see what I mean? And it can put me on a trajectory. If you came to Jummah some weeks ago, and we talked about these verses in Surah Al-Hadid, where the munafiqeen are speaking to the mu'mineen as they are standing on a day of judgment, and a wall is between them, and the munafiqeen say to the mu'mineen, like, we were with you in this world, right? Like, why is there separation? Do you know? And then they give them an indication as to how, like, yes, you were with us, but this was the trajectory that impacted your iman. And step number one was like the surroundings and the environment that you purposely put yourself in. And how it started to then lend itself to procrastination. I'll just do it later, right? That then got to a place where it creates doubt. Well, why do I need to pray at this time anyway, right? Until then, it overwhelms. It's all written in the Quran. Do you know what I mean? And you can think like, well, I used to X, Y, and Z, and then something else happened. Is it difficult? Yeah, it's difficult. But is it impossible? No. And when you can acknowledge it's difficult, that it's not always supposed to be easy. This is why we talked about the mujahideen, and they're shown the people who struggle. Do you get what I mean? And then you make determinations on like, how can I kind of adapt and figure this out? Do you see what I'm saying? But as an avenue, if you learn your fiqh, it can be helpful in being able to adapt in certain situations. And then you can plan accordingly. Does that make sense? Right? You gotta try your best in honoring the windows of time as they've been prescribed. There's immense barakah in those windows of time. And you ensure that you're doing it in those times. If you miss a window of time, then you make sure you make up the prayer because it's still something that's owed. You see what I mean? And you build that consistent relationship, and it's a work in progress, right? Get 1 down before you get 2 down. Get 2 down before you get 3. Work your way up to 5, and encourage and be kind and be patient with other people. You see what I'm saying, right? But if somebody's willfully choosing sleep over prayer, the adhan of Fajr literally says, right, that prayer is better than sleep. As-salatu khayrun min an-nawm. Do you know? But you got to think on like what standard this is operating. Do you see what I mean? Does that make sense? And the Prophet sustains like 12 years of the most immense persecution and difficulty. We talked about all of this in this like Seerah class, right? And even when he leaves from Taif and like all kinds of stuff is happening, he's been abused, rocks thrown at him, he's bleeding. What does he do when he stops? Before he gets to Mecca, he stops and he prays tahajjud. Do you know? They have salah, they don't have the daily prayers that are prescribed, right? And we know that there are people of previous nations that had prescribed prayers and they didn't do it. How we know? Even just from this incident that we're going to continue on with, Musa alayhi salam is going to tell the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, my people didn't do what they were supposed to do. Yours aren't going to do what they were supposed to do also. Do you see what I mean? And you want to be an evidence for what? Oh, thank you. You're the best. Amazing. Yeah. Great. I will eat this now. But do you get what I'm saying? Right? So here, the Prophet is seeing this. Let's continue. Then he saw people who wore loincloths on the fronts and on their backs. They were roaming the way camels and sheep roam about. They were eating thistles and zakum. The zakum are a type of fruit that is described in the 23rd chapter, the 37th chapter of the Quran is the reference. Surat as-Safat, that Allah describes these trees that are trees of Jahannam. May Allah protect us from it. Do you know? And so they were eating thistles and this fruit and white coals and stones. And he said, who are these, O Jibreel? And he replied, these are the ones who did not meet the obligation of paying sadaqah from what they possessed, whereas Allah never kept anything from them. Do you know? A lot of this religion is on like social equity. It's around social kind of cohesion. Do you know what I mean? There's no page in the Quran that says, here's the solution to poverty, but there are multiple pages that talk about how it is that you're meant to support someone who's stricken by poverty. And money is a big fitna. May Allah protect us from it. Do you know? You can have a love for money and it can be healthy or unhealthy. Do you know what I mean? If you come to the hadith class we do on Mondays, we're talking about this hadith on the 13th hadith of the Arba'in of Imam Nawawi, لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يحب لأخيه ما يحب لنفسه, that not one of you will believe or have complete iman until he loves for his brother what he loves for himself, right? Like, it's not a measure of success how much money you have. Do you know? And like, look at what money does to the world. I mean, it's crazy. How many billions of dollars were spent in the last months for an election cycle that was in order to gain what exactly? Do you know? And people are like willfully throwing their money to be in this place. And like, there's literally, man, people dying on the streets. You don't want, it's not even like a pursuit of power. You don't acknowledge how you have a desire to have proximity to power. You're not even the one that's powerful. You just want to be able to be close to power. And then it denies the foundations of what this religion is. Do you know? Right? You start to think like, who taught you about generosity and charity versus like, how did you learn about greed? Do you know? And not a greed that's like a Scrooge McDuck greed that I'm going to hoard my wealth, but a greed that is insatiable and it doesn't even allow for you to enjoy what you have. Like a gratitude and an appreciation that would enable me to be in a place where I can actually gain contentment through what it is that I've been given. Do you know? And so these were people who possessed and they didn't give like what it was that they were supposed to give to others. Do you get what I mean? And then they have to deal with the consequences of this, right? Does this make sense? A value can increase through the implementation of the value. So if I want to increase in generosity, the way I increase in generosity is by being generous. If I want to increase in like kindness, compassion, love, patience, the vehicle for the increase of the virtue is the virtue itself. Do you know? And how do you like share things? Do you get what I mean? Right? How do you like give stuff? Did you bring more kanafa?
I brought utensils.
You brought utensils for what? The kanafa is done. You don't, there's some hungry Muslims in this room.
I think there might be more.
Yeah?
Yeah, okay.
You can bring it. It will get eaten.
There was only a napkin in there.
Oh my gosh, look at that. Alhamdulillah. See? But like, think about this, okay? Did any of you do anything to get this kanafa today? No, right? You did. What did you do? It was literally brought to you. Do any of you know Sophia who brought the kanafa 20 minutes ago? No. If you see her in the hallway, are you ever going to be like, man, that's a terrible human being? Or you going to be like, that's the kanafa girl, right? Do you know? She brought us kanafa. Do you know what I mean? It's remarkable to think that that was purchased and sat in a room where other people had it, but Allah wrote it for you. And it made its way here. But she gets the ajr of being the means through which it was given to you. Do you understand? Nobody can take that away from her. And we can talk about her like this because most of you in this room probably have never met her before. But what else do you need to know her as? Do you see? Who cares what she's studying? Who cares what degree she's going to have? You benefited from her thoughtfulness for you, right? And you know where ihsan comes in? Why did they have to come down with a bag full of forks? Why? But somebody sitting somewhere said, oh, we gave this to them and we didn't give them something to eat it with. Do you see what I mean? How can that not be something pleasing to Allah? Do you understand? And if you have something to give and you don't give it away, why would that not then impact where you are in the world beyond this one? Do you get what I mean? And sadaqah, zakah, your khums, like whatever you're giving, your charitable contributions, they're spiritual acts. They're not meant to be mindless acts. The Prophet ﷺ has a hadith where he says, essentially, like to give to the miskeen, and then he says, and sit with them. Do you know? It's not just about support, but you have a relationship with people. Do you get what I mean? Does that make sense? Kanafa girl is back.
I'm gonna stay this time too.
But do you understand? Why is the prophetic counsel to not just support, but also sit with the miskeen? Do you know? Right? The person who's in a place where they have some kind of need. Do you get what I'm saying? Does that make sense? Right? When do you sit with the people who are miskeen and benefit and build a relationship and have cohesion and think, that's my sister, that's my brother. Not that I'm better than them or they're worse than me. By virtue of what? If you think your good graces are identified by the dollars that you have, right? That's not what it is. There's a lot of poor people who are content and a lot of rich people who are content. And there's a lot of poor people who are miserable and a lot of rich people who are miserable. That's not what the basis of it is. But here, the Prophet ﷺ, as he's journeying now with Jibreel, there are people who these are the ones who did not meet the obligation of paying charity from what they possessed, whereas Allah never kept anything from them. You know? I don't know if I've said this in this gathering or the other gatherings, right? But like, I've been to like all kinds of conflict zones, man, and refugee camps. I've sat with people who have nothing. And in every place, they don't let me leave without feeding me. Do you know? I think I said it here, and I'll say it again. When I was in Morocco, there's a brother named Hassan who I met, and we stood outside the rubble of his sister's home. He had come to visit them in the Atlas Mountains in Morocco, where I landed the day after the earthquake hit, and his visit was because his newborn niece had just been born. And he survived because he left to go get a gift for his niece, and in the minutes he was gone, the earthquake hit, the entire home collapsed, And his sister, his mother, and the newborn baby, they all died in the earthquake. May Allah raise them amongst the shuhada. And he's telling me this, and he just experienced this, like literally just this happened within like a short time span. And I was leaving. He was like, you can't leave yet. And he brought me a piece of bread and a cup of tea that he prepped on just like a makeshift fire he made on the ground. And it wasn't that he was giving me like what was just like the bare minimums. This is all he had, and he still gave it to me. After he had lost so much, do you know? How can you be content when your heart is attached to stuff outside of you? If your happiness is contingent upon this thing being in your presence, like I am only content when I have this, then what am I when I don't have it? But if my contentment comes from the inside out, I'm grateful when like the risk just comes. What did we do? This is when you're like the birds and you put your trust and it just comes. What did you do for a second thing of kanafa to come now? What did you do? What did we do? It was bought for someone but written for you. And the people who bring it to us, I know them to be good people. And their goodness is both a catalyst for them bringing it, as well as them bringing it contributes to their goodness. Do you see? And the deprivation has a connection to not just what is worldly, but otherworldly. Whereas Allah never kept anything from them. Do you get what I mean? How do you turn it into a spiritual act? How do you start to break down the mindsets of arrogance that come from wealth and greed and all of this stuff? You got to just spend some time first and really think about it, right? Question number one, you want to write at the top of a notebook and then answer it. How much is actually enough? How much wealth, how much money, how much materialistic gain is enough? You need to have an answer to that question. Otherwise, you will waste the best energy of your life sitting alone in offices, pursuant of money, that when you die, someone else is going to be having fun with it because you never had the time to use it for yourself anyway. And who cares that the successes were temporary at the sacrifice of what? And then the consequences are real. May Allah protect us from it. The other things you want to take from this, like you have to know the rules behind these things. Do you know? When does it become obligatory upon me to give? Who do I give to? What are the things that are eligible for me to consider in my net assets that I then now have to make contributions on again and again and again? And the consequence back to the individual, if we have to make it selfish, if you're not engaged in a mode of purifying wealth in the way that Allah has decreed, not the way that you think, then you're consuming with unpure wealth. Obligatory charity is haram for me to consume for myself. It's already owed to somebody else. I don't get to choose that I'm keeping that for me and it's mine. It's for somebody else. Do you get what I'm saying? And the spiritual elements of it start to have impact if I'm actually treating it as a spiritual act. Okay, let's take a minute and then we'll run through one more section. If you turn to the person's next to you, what's coming up for you so far? What is it bringing up for you? If you want to eat kanafa number 2, also feel free to line up and get it. But let's talk for a bit as to what's kind of coming up, and then we'll come back and discuss. But go ahead.
there's this other one. It was on the night I didn't go. And one thing, I'm out of Sharia, so like blood is not and so I think for me, like I'm all for giving to give when it's like convenient for me and I have to do that and it's like nice and easy. But I get really annoyed and like surprisingly with giving when it's like not convenient. Like someone that I love like somebody or I have the means to that like I would have to go a little bit out of my way to do it. I like don't want to and I think that is something I think about. Like I feel like even like donating it and putting this in the back of like yeah, like send it to our heroes and I'll like send it to a family or something to something. But let's say you know someone who like is sick and needs you to come like buy your food and have them and spend time with them, like all of a sudden it's like but there's so much probably even more barakah in that than you just like sending your food privately. So I feel like that's something I want to work on in the future.
Okay, so what are some of the things that are coming up for people? What are we discussing? What's coming up so far? Yeah.
I think like what was coming up, like when we were discussing, was like the main theme of like discipline in our lives, like whether it's praying, whether it's paying zakat, or whether it's like trying to consume halal as much as possible, or whether it's taking the time and money out to do Hajj one day. And I think it's a common theme of like we don't need to understand why we need to eat halal or why we can't drink or like why we need to pray or why we need to fast Ramadan. We have to do it because we were told to, not so much like as you said, like that example earlier. You don't need to know what the broccoli is doing. You just need to know that's good for you and then like to consume it. And so I think it all like Allah's trying to like implement that type of discipline into our lives so that we can implement it to gain like our materialistic goals that we have in this world.
And it creates openings for that understanding to then come, right? What's the world going to look like in the next year? Do you know? How long was it going to take for Gaza to like rebuild? You know, may Allah grant them ease and end the occupation that's taking place there and make us a generation that witnesses a free Palestine in our lifetime. Do you know? Who's going to help to rebuild it? Do you see what I mean? Is it going to be us, right? Are we going to say, no, I gave last week, or I gave a month ago, or I gave a year ago? Do you know? And are you going to be willing to like eat differently and like travel differently? Because the consequence would be the difference between building a hospital, building a clinic, building a home, like building something, do you know? Right? And putting it into a practical sense of, well, then I can get to a place reflectively that can help me to also understand the spirit of the practice. And none of my worship is just for me or about me. And my failure to engage in it creates a deprivation for everybody around me. Do you see what I mean? Does that make sense? What else are we discussing? What else came up for people? Yeah.
Over here, I found myself thinking about the question you asked, what is enough for us, right? And then I started thinking what's the context of what is enough in terms of what, like money or whatnot. And I automatically, like most of us, started thinking finances and these things like that. And it reminded me of a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ when he said, whoever wakes up in the morning and he has a roof over his head, he has food for the day, and he's in good health, then it is as if he's attained acquired the entire world and attained the entire world. So oftentimes we find ourselves looking for more even after we have enough, right? So all of us, we're all in good positions, and we kind of live like a king 5,000 years ago doesn't live as good as we do, even in the lowest levels of society today, right? They don't have air conditioning or heaters or whatnot, right? They can't just go to fast food and go get food and the conveniences in life and Subway and this, that, right? So I feel like even in the Western world, at least, even if you're on the lowest level of society, you still live like a king with 5,000 years ago. So that was one thing I was thinking about.
Yeah, right. And that's why the very first word is Alhamdulillah, right? Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, because that's like where all of this has the potential of starting, do you know? But it's going to be a lot easier to give up a prescribed prayer time because those are just words on my tongue. I haven't actualized it in my heart. And this thing of gratitude is not meant to be just like, you know, we were talking about this 14 centuries ago, not just like people who engage in mindfulness, who have like usurped and culturally appropriated other people's traditions. They're like, practice gratitude. Like it's embedded in our tradition. Why do you think you say Subhanallah, Alhamdulillah, Allahu Akbar after every prayer? Like attach some meaning and reason to it. Do you know what I mean? Bring yourself to a place of vulnerability that can acknowledge the difficulties by gratitude being a vision modifier that isn't that there's no challenge, but it enables me to now approach the challenge different because that contentment is there as an actual vision modifier, right? And yeah, like we're the only animals after our stomachs are full, we still keep eating. Nothing else in creation does that. And that's where consciousness comes in and these spiritual vehicles come in. So we are in control of ourselves. Ourselves are not in control of us. Do you see? You want to practice some type of charity, even if you don't have money. Like give of your time, volunteer, be in a place where you see contribution elsewhere with regularity. Do you know? There's no shortage of it. There's people in our tradition who only were found out to be engaged in acts of charity after they passed away, right? Zain al-Abidin, he was known for feeding like so many people because after he passed, like the food parcels stopped coming in front of their homes and like in the places of need, right? You don't have to tell everybody. And this is like a part that's important to understand. We have public worship, you know, like we pray together. Do you see what I'm saying? You have private worship. You can go to your house. I can pray with my family and my kids. But there's got to be some element categorically that's also just secrets between me and Allah. Do you know what I mean? And you got to like figure that out because it is likely going to be the most probable in sincere conviction inwardly. I'm only doing it when Allah's eyes are upon me. Do you know? And like, it's not either or, it's a both and. Like a public, a private, and a secret, like 3 spheres, right? But this is the beauty of engaging in acts of kindness. It just benefits you the most, right? And this is just proven through positive psychology. The Prophet ﷺ is able to smile, and he is known as the smiling one, even when he carries such heaviness and grief, because he's also just constantly engaged in doing things for other people. Do you know? It creates like a different type of ease. And I don't know why, but just the way we were built for 50 and not 5, right? Allah also built us to find nourishment through acts of generosity and kindness. And it doesn't do for you what harshness does, right? إن الله رفيق ويحب الرفق ويؤتي على الرفق ما لا يؤتي على الأنف. That indeed Allah is kind and He loves kindness and He gives for gentleness what He does not give for harshness. Do you know? The trade-offs like don't make sense. Think about how much anger you've had to hold from people who aren't responsible in how they express their anger. Think about how you've had to deal with adults who are spiritually just children and they've never grown up inwardly, and how stressed it makes you and how difficult it makes you. Would those people, you would say, be categorized as generous people? Like, are they volunteering their time and giving away of what they have? Or is the centering of the ego permeate into like other things as well? Do you see what I mean? Okay, let's read one last section and then we'll pause for today. Then he saw a people who had in front of them excellent meat, disposed in pots, and also putrid foul meat, and they would eat from the foul meat and not touch the good meat. He said, "What is this, O Jibra'il?" And he replied, "These are the men from your community who had an excellent lawful wife at home and who would go and see a foul woman and spend the night with her, and the women who would leave her excellent lawful husband to go and see a foul man and spend the night with him." Infidelity is not allowed in our religion. May Allah protect us from it, right? Trust is the basis of like everything in our religion. Ayatul Munafiq Thalath, إذا حدث كذب وإذا وعد أخلف وإذا تؤمن خان, that the signs of the hypocrite are three. May Allah protect us from it. إذا حدث كذب, that when they speak they lie. وإذا وعد أخلف, and when they make a promise they break it. وإذا تؤمن خان, and when they're entrusted they break the trust. You know? So don't break trusts. How does this relate to the previous part on kind of giving away? Do you get what I mean? Like, how can we connect some of these things together now, right? When I have like greed, how does that relate potentially to me also going and seeking extramarital relationships or infidelity, breaking trust? Does the question make sense? We can talk to the people next to us for a minute. Like, what contributes? What's the connection between these two parts of it? Let's talk about it for a minute and then come back, but go ahead.
How much is actually enough? And like in this situation, yeah, like why was that not enough? Like why wasn't you having to give that much? And also why didn't you give your time and your love and everything else? Like that's an obligation of someone. Like that's a right that your spouse has on you. You have on your
Okay, so what's the connection? Is there any connections here? Sorry, we'll wrap up soon. Is there any connections here? Well, yes, the answer is yes. What is the connection? Selfishness? What is that? Can you distill it a bit?
Sorry?
How do you, like, break it down a little bit more?
Honestly, I just thought of that in the top of the head. I didn't have it.
It's okay. Just, it's a good practice to just say words that come. No, but that's a part of it. Yeah, go ahead.
Just lack of satisfaction we already have, and lack of appreciation.
And where does this come from?
I'm stealing the answer from the previous, how like
Yeah?
lower self.
Yeah. What else? Somebody else had their hand raised? Yeah.
I think just piggybacking off of that, like just understanding that the human being is different and we're created with infinite potential ourselves with what is right for us, we don't turn to Allah, we're always gonna feel unsatisfied, and we're never gonna feel content. And when we never feel content, we always try to grab more and more. And if we always try to, grab more food, grab more, sexual desire, sexual pleasure, I mean, one marriage is never gonna be enough to satisfy us. One meal is never gonna be enough. So when we're internally like hurting, and we're not filling ourselves with what we need to be filled with to nourish ourselves spiritually with Allah and closeness to Allah, then obviously it's gonna spread, and we're going to just try to get as much desire and carnal stuff as we can, I guess.
Yeah, you're in a consumer-driven society. The purpose a consumer-driven society draws upon is twofold. One, it's going to tell you that your happiness is contingent on buying what we sell you, right? You ever see a commercial and people are miserable in the products that they're trying to sell to you? Do you know? I'm at a restaurant and someone's crying as they eat like the pizza at the pizza place. Someone is like in tears as they buy like the car. No, everyone always looks so happy doing everything because that's what they're selling to you, that your happiness is rooted in the purchase of this. And then the second thing that they're consequently selling to you is that what you have right now, it's not gonna give that to you. It's gonna purposely create dissatisfaction. Just think about it for a second. Do you know what I mean? I have like a laptop that was in our office because my laptop broke some time ago. It was just gone, like it dead, right? So I was telling Isam, who does our media stuff, hey, I think I should get a new laptop. And he said, there's this like amazing new laptop that Apple has that has like AI technology and all of this kind of stuff. And I was getting so excited. He's talking to me. I don't even know half the stuff he's talking about, right? And then at the end of it, he's like, you don't need that one. And I was like, should I be offended by this conversation? And then he said, well, what are you going to use it for? And I'm just going to use it for basic stuff. Do you know what I mean? Like, people ask me constantly, why do you have this version of an iPhone? I have this version of an iPhone because my wife bought herself a nicer version of an iPhone, and she gave me like the old version of an iPhone. But when my kids or whoever say to me like, Baba, are you gonna go get a new one? And I'm like, well, why? And they say like, it's got this great, like this and that. I'm like, you're 9 years old, man. Why are you, where are you spitting these bullet points out from? Do you know? But why would I pay $1,000 to use something the same exact way as the one that I have already? And why is my identity so attached to what I possess, right? Ali radiallahu anh, he says, detachment isn't to not own anything of the world, but detachment is to not let anything of the world own you. You might think that you are in possession of your possessions, but in reality, your possessions, they possess you. And what you're purchasing is not happiness, it's novelty, right? My kids, the example I like to use, when I take them to ice cream, even now, right? Daughter's turned 12 this year, my son's 9 years old. We go to get ice cream at a place, and they spend forever trying to figure out what ice cream they're gonna get because there's so many ice cream flavors. They'll sample all of these things, and even at 9 and 12, my kids are still super cute, mashallah. So the person behind the counter can't really do anything. And then they still end up getting the same flavors every single time, right? Like simple stuff. We go to things. Some of you have gone with us, right? My kids, don't they just eat ice cream sandwiches wherever they go? It's the same, like at the bottom of the freezer, like covered with like all kinds. Nobody's touched it for months. It's an ice cream sandwich, Bubba. It's so good. We're going to get it. And then I get the same thing too. But when we're sitting in the ice cream place and we are eating things, we'll also try each other's, right? And every time we leave, one, if not both of them, says, man, maybe I should have gotten a different flavor. Next time I'll try something else. They can't enjoy what's in front of them because they're always worried, was something else better than what I have? In a consumer-driven society, it instills that mindset within you. I can't enjoy what's in front of me because I'm always worried, would something else have been better, right? These people, just like a lot of people today that you all know treat relationships the same exact way. If you treat that girl like a cup of ice cream, you're gonna always then wonder, is something else better than what I have? And you think you're choosing a choice, but in reality, you have choices made for you. There's gonna always be a reason to say, maybe something else is gonna come that's gonna be different than this. Why would somebody go to the extent of engaging in infidelity? And you can't have kind of watered down understandings of religion. Allah gives us divorce for a reason. Some relationships need to have endings to them. They just do. And the hadith is like saying, you have men who had excellent women at their home. You had women who had excellent men. They were married to people who were good people, and they still gave in to what exactly? Do you know? And now they're in this place where something of beauty is there, but they're choosing what is putrid. Do you see what I mean? And all of it starts to be connected. If your religious practice is not about your heart, then how will your heart be transformed to the extent that it possibly could be transformed, right? You should never cheat on anybody, nor should you let it be something that you validate or justify. And you'd be astonished. I've done this for 20 years. I'm in a place where I'm pretty stoic, I'm pretty monotonous. This is just where I'm at, most of the time. Do you know? But when people sit in my office and they're telling me things, I am not going to respond in a way that is going to throw them off. But I can't begin to tell you the number of women who have sat in my office who have said they expect that their husbands are going to cheat on them. As if that's just a given. How can you practice Islam and be from a Muslim country and the norm is that a man is going to cheat on his wife? How? Do you know? And where does the disconnect come that, the sunnah clearly is what it is, but then all kinds of stuff comes in the way, right? Do you see what I mean? And why are you letting that stuff be what defines you? Do you know? See your Islam as an asset, not as a liability. Who cares how much money you have? Ali radiallahu anh, he says that your hearts, they're worth only the price of paradise, so sell them only for that price. Do you know? And for temporary satisfaction, what do you get? And you're hurting somebody. Do you know what I mean? Don't break the trust. Do you know? You don't want to justify it. You don't want to validate it. There's problems that come up, then you address it, and then you make decisions that are difficult. But the underlying element here, there is a bowl of something putrid and a bowl of something that is amazing, and they're choosing actively what is putrid. You're going to see in the latter part of this hadith, right? Milk and wine comes to the Prophet ﷺ. He chooses the milk over the wine. And it's not just that wine is alcoholic, but wine is something that is adulterated. The Prophet chooses milk, which is like a pure natural substance. It is unadulterated. Do you see? There's going to be a bunch of things that come up, and Jibreel is going to say, if you responded to this, this would have happened to your nation. If you responded to this, this would have happened to your nation. If you responded to this, this would have happened to your nation. If you want to know the state of your heart, you have to think, why am I drawn towards ugliness and not drawn towards beauty? And it's a hard conversation because we're not the only ones that contribute to what is housed in our hearts. May Allah make it easy for us. But if I enjoy the company of people who are racist, if I enjoy the validation of individuals who are contributing to the military industrial complex, the prison industrial complex, I like being around people who gossip and backbite. Why? What is your heart telling you that you're attracted to? Why are you attracted to something that's just not good? Do you know? And having that conversation then just brings me to a place of recognition, like, is this the trajectory I want to go on? Do you see what I mean? How does that happen? And we get to a place where the reflection happens in this world, because this hadith is telling us consequently that, like, worlds don't end with this world. You have life that has continuity to it. And this is a world of action and choice. You don't get to choose choices after you leave from this world. Do you see what I mean? One of the other things we want to interject here, and we can pick up after the fact, if you have separation from somebody in a worldly sense, our tradition teaches us that we are created beings, but we're created for eternal existence. So people continue to exist, even not in this materialistic like sense of experience. And what we do here can also bring benefit to people who are there, right? So if those people can't get up to pray their Fajr prayer, out of your love for them, you get up to pray Fajr and you make dua for them and their maghfirah. How many of you have ever made dua for my grandmother? Probably not most of you. It doesn't mean you're a bad person, but why would you think about somebody that you don't have really a reason to think about? Do you know? But there's names of people that you only know their names. And the realities that we are thinking of and being exposed to here are also not ones that are meant to be understood egocentrically. But what do you think the Prophet is thinking as he's being told about all of this stuff? Is he thinking about, how do I cover my own bases? Or how am I going to be there for people who this might be their reality at the end of certain things? Do you get what I mean? Does that make sense? Right? And so you think about how your living and existence is not just for you, but it's for others also. And where you can bear impact on people, that what's left behind, like knowledge that is acted upon. So somebody taught you something good, then you act upon it with an intention that you're what's left behind. And every time you act on something that someone taught you, you're bringing them benefit, right? An ongoing charity, like go give some charity. Bucket number 2 that's being talked about here of sadaqah, with an intention that it's a means of ajr for like the deceased. And bucket number 3 that the Prophet says is you leave behind a believing child to pray for you, right? So who's making dua for your loved ones? Do you know what I mean? People struggle so you could be where you're at today. You're either the answer to your ancestors' prayers or like you're not. And as these realities are shown to us, they create for us a sense of accountability. But at another level, it's like, I want to go home and I have another reason to get out of bed at Fajr time so that I'm praying for people who have moved on to this next worldly existence. Do you get what I'm saying? Right? And there's certain people whose names only you know. And there's certain people who only you have an interaction with them. Do you see what I mean? This is why prayer is better than sleep, and it's embedded in the adhan of Fajr. Not because you're just fulfilling burdensome obligation, but every missed opportunity, you're also leaving behind those who are reliant upon you to be there for them with a sense of love and compassion. Do you get what I mean? Sayyid ibn Musayyib, rahimahullah, he would tell his children, I do righteous deeds for your benefit. Do you know? So somebody asks me, like, why do you get done what you get done? It's because I love each of you so much. And when you turn to me and entrust me, saying, Khalid, can you make dua for this or that? Why would I let a paltry act of haram become an obstacle between me being able to have as much attentiveness in my prayer for someone that I love and not being able to be there for them fully? Because I chose not even myself fully, I just chose a temporary version of myself for a moment in this world. I love my kids, I love my wife, I love my family. So I get up and I try to do whatever I can and put as much goodness into the world because I know who it is that I'm doing it for. And as you're hearing these things and reading them, also think about it from the aspect that is not individualistic in our tradition, but sees us through a prism of a collective and communal. Do you get what I mean? Does that make sense? Okay, so let's do this just as we wrap up. If you turn to the person next to you, what are you taking away from tonight's conversation? And then we'll discuss for a few minutes and then come and close. But go ahead. Okay, what are some of the things we're taking away from tonight's conversation? What's coming up for people? Maybe get a couple of people. Yeah.
Being more sincere in your actions.
Being more sincere in actions. Great. Other thoughts? Damn, they're having a good time, huh? Inshallah.
They pause to reflect.
Hmm?
They pause to reflect.
Did they? Yeah, it stopped, right? Yeah. Somebody had their hand raised over here. I was just saying things. Yeah.
He kind of said it, but I was going to say reflection, right? Because a lot of times we do things every single day just out of habit, right? We pray 5 times a day because it's become the norm. You say all the things that we daily do, Bismillah, before you eat it, right? And a lot
Yeah, right. And thinking is not the goal, because everybody's thinking. All of you are thinking something right now. Do you know? But the idea is to reclaim capacity to choose what you think about and how you think about the things you think about. Do you see? Right? And these things become linked because then you practice gratitude. It creates prisms that bring a little bit more ease, breaks up negativity, and positivity creates more energy. You don't have to have a self-deprecating mode, right? Because some of us, by our demeanors, are going to respond to things in different ways. Do you know? And that's fine. The Prophet ﷺ was also someone who cried a lot. He was somebody who had like deep sorrow, and these things like coexist within a prism of contentment. Do you see what I mean? And that's the goal, contentment, not like novelty and fleeting happiness, and I'm just gonna like laugh and giggle all the time. Do you know? That's not what the point is. Do you see? Does that make sense? Okay. So the rest of the week, I don't know what's happening. On Friday, we're doing Halakha here from 6 to 8. You want to talk about it, Janan?
Yes.
You're shaking your head no when you said yes, Janan.
So we're gonna have a leadership workshop with Imam Khalid, 6 to 8 p.m. It's open for all grad students in New York. So if you're in Columbia, CUNY, NYU, please come. If you're not a grad student, then please make dua that please make dua that the event goes successfully and share it to your grad student friends.
Yeah. What was I going to say? On Saturday, we have a convert brunch that's happening. So if you are a convert, you are exploring Islam, you're a family member of someone in one of those categories, it's going to be at Solo's apartment, who's one of our conversations leaders. And I can send you the info on that if you'd like to attend. And then on one of these days also, Sunday, thanks man. On Sunday, our professionals group is hosting a chai and paint event. And that's gonna be in the 4th floor auditorium, I think starting at 4 o'clock. Is that right? 4 o'clock?
5.
5 o'clock, yeah, great. Yeah, so come for that as well. You wanna try to be in community, right? I know there's a lot of challenges that have come up aside from an election cycle, which I think people's experiences emotionally, or responses rather, have been a lot more varied. Generally speaking, it's not to take away from your subjective experience. There's not like a right or wrong here, do you know? But I think with the added difficulty of revelations of spiritual abuse that have come up in the last week, you know, and all this other stuff that's been ongoing in terms of conflict, there's things that we're trying to put together to see what makes sense. Some spaces that might be, you know, communal, might also be gender separated at some portion, just so there's like women talking to women and men talking to men, and then all of us together. But if anybody needs anything, like let us know, let me know. And you know, we're here to help in whatever ways that we can, inshallah. But you want to come to like these gatherings and these spaces. You know, if you sneak into something that you're not supposed to be at, you know, given like the nature of some of what's going on, maybe we won't hold it against you. But also just understand why we segment certain things is so that people have a capacity to kind of talk a little bit more attuned to like realities. Oh, sorry, my mom's calling me again. 1 second. Assalamu alaikum, Maji. नहीं मैं आपको अभी 5 मिनट में फ़ोन करता हूँ. Okay, assalamu alaikum. And then, you know, there's other things that come up, right? So try to come, be there so that people are not coming and they're not benefiting from your presence. And if you're feeling heavy, don't be alone, like be around people. Does that make sense? Okay, so let's take a pause. People want to help finish the kanafa. If you want to take some of it home, that would be great. We'll see everybody next Wednesday. Was this like really long tonight? Was it too long? It was, right? Did you say, you can say yes, it's okay. Oh, you already said it. You can't take it back. What do you mean? Yeah. Sorry. I know this was a lot longer than it was supposed to go. I don't know what happened, but should have stopped 30 minutes ago, so forgive me for that. Next week we won't do that. Yeah? Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. We prayed Isha already, so if people haven't prayed, is anybody going to make a Jama'ah for Isha? You guys are? Okay, so if you haven't prayed, these guys are going to make a Jama'ah in the next 5 minutes, so feel free to join them as well. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Hey, how's it going? Alaikum salam.
So,
Ali, can you turn this off? It's just to hit the live stream off.
so I just